Good morning. Here's everything you missed over the last 11 hours. It was a busy one. You've got 16 videos to catch up on, covering everything from a massive $8 million Linux Foundation launch and cutting-edge battery breakthroughs to a deep dive on GitHub Copilot across a full beginner series. Let's get into it. The big story of the day comes from Lunjuk, who is absolutely buzzing, and honestly, rightfully so. The Omcom Foundation, the nonprofit entity backing Omarchy Linux, launched with $8 million in day one funding. And not just any funding, 8 separate $1 million contributions, each from a different high-profile tech figure. The list is genuinely impressive. The CEOs of Shopify, Stripe, Dell, and Cloudflare, Jack Dorsey of Twitter fame, a co-founder of Oculus, the CEO of 37 Signals, and DHH himself, the creator of both Omarchy Linux and Ruby on Rails. Lunjuk was in full, oh my heavens mode throughout, calling it just off the charts and absolutely freaking awesome. Which is a fair reaction when you realize this is a Linux project that is roughly a year and a half old, attracting that caliber of industry backing on day one. He also gave the political context that makes the story particularly meaningful to him. Just the day before the announcement, Red Hat employees and members of the Org Code of Conduct Committee were publicly calling DHH, Framework Computer, and anyone associated with Omarchy fascists and Nazis. Lunjuk was genuinely irritated about this, not performatively, but with real pointed frustration, and his point was sharp. The Shopify, Stripe, Dell, and Cloudflare CEOs simply do not care about that noise. They looked at technically interesting software and wrote checks. That's the dynamic he wanted to highlight. He read directly from DHH's announcement. A couple of key quotes worth knowing. DHH described Omarchy Quattro as having given people a taste of the malleable computer of the future, and said it now feels like a moral obligation to make this future more broadly available. On the funding itself, DHH called it a ridiculous sum of money and said he intends to make it last, then added, and this was the rallying cry moment, we're going to make the prophecy of the year of Linux on the desktop come true. All the pieces are now in place. Time to go all in. The first announced use of foundation funds is an exclusive sponsorship of Vaxry, the developer of Hyperland, whom DHH called the most cracked Linux kid in Poland. That framing alone tells you a lot about the vibe of this project. Hyperland is one of 3 core technologies in Omarchy's stack, the full stack being Arch Linux, Hyperland, and Quickshell, and the idea is that Vaxry can now focus entirely on Hyperland without thinking about commercial work or fundraising. Lunjuk also drew a broader strategic point that he clearly found exciting in a longer-term way. He sees this well-funded foundation, backed by a hardware company like Dell from day one, as a potential exit vehicle from what he views as dysfunctional open-source governance structures, specifically calling out the Linux Foundation for discrimination issues, hardware support losses, and general dysfunction. He genuinely floated the possibility of a Linux fork becoming necessary in coming years, and said having Omcom/Omarchy well-positioned makes that viable in a way it wouldn't have been before. He was also refreshingly transparent about his personal reservations. He doesn't like AI baked deeply into operating systems, doesn't like tying online accounts to an OS, isn't a fan of tiling window managers, dislikes Wayland, and dislikes Systemed, all of which are central to Omarchy. Despite every one of those objections, he said he would still recommend Omarchy to people whose preferences align with those choices. That's a rare combination of enthusiasm and intellectual honesty. He closed describing himself as oddly optimistic, more so than in years, and flagged that a follow-up interview with DHH is in the works. Switching to productivity tools, there was a really interesting comparison video from Nodus Labs, and full disclosure up front. The presenter is the developer of one of the 2 tools being compared, InfraNodus, so keep that in mind. But he genuinely tried to be fair-minded, and his frustration with Graphify felt authentic rather than manufactured. The setup: both tools are ways to turn your Obsidian notes vault into a knowledge graph, with AI-driven insights via Claude. The presenter is working in Cursor rather than native Obsidian because Cursor has better AI integration. He graphed the same projects folder with both tools, notes covering InfraNodus as a product, a bodywork practice, a publishing house, and other projects, so it was a true apples-to-apples test. Graphify is installed via a terminal command that drops a local Python application on your machine. Running Graphify install injects the Graphify skill into Claude globally. And that word, globally, is where things got uncomfortable for him. Once installed, Graphify is always active in every Claude interaction, regardless of whether you want it. It modifies the Claude file and a manifest file, meaning removing it requires manually editing those files. He framed this as a genuine trust issue. He wants to invoke tools deliberately, not have them silently running in the background across all his workflows. The knowledge graph Graphify produces is also described as extremely dense and essentially only legible to the LLM, not useful for a human trying to navigate or steer their own thinking. The insight Graphify surfaced in the demo was valid but obvious. It identified two separate topic basins, InfraNodus the product and body practice variability, and suggested they could be connected. He already knew they were separate domains. No guidance on how to actually bridge them. InfraNodus works very differently. You download a skill file from GitHub, drop it in the Claude Skills folder, and it only activates when you explicitly type InfraNodus in Claude. That on-demand behavior was something he returned to repeatedly as a key advantage. Graphs are stored in your InfraNodus cloud account rather than locally accessible via web or mobile app. The visual graph it produces is much more readable. You can see topical clusters, click nodes to see contexts, and identify underdeveloped areas of your thinking in a gaps mode. The standout moment in the demo was the insight InfraNodus returned for the same query. Fractal reset, habit as overcentralized network pattern, freedom as recovered variability across scales. He was visibly more animated about this than anything in the Graphify demo, and the reason he gave was what he called observability. InfraNodus showed him exactly which graph gaps it used to arrive at the insight, so he could understand where it came from and replicate the process. That's not just a better answer, it's a transparent process. He also suggested a hybrid workflow. Use Graphify to generate its local JSON graph, then click that JSON in cursor and visualize it through InfraNodus. You get the richer, human-readable InfraNodus visualization on top of whatever Graphify built. His practical installation advice. For InfraNodus in Claude or Cursor, download the skill zip from GitHub releases, unzip into the Claude skills folder, and graph your Vault folder by folder rather than all at once. Keeps contexts granular and separately queryable. Now, you had a big batch of videos from Microsoft Developer Today. They dropped a full beginner series on using GitHub Copilot to build a personal brand, and the best way to get through it is in order. So let's start at the very beginning with the series trailer. Alexander Elgazabal, a software engineer at Microsoft, opens the series with a warm, brief trailer that sets the stage. The series is framed as peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, created by early-in-career Microsoft employees, not handed down from corporate, and that spirit comes through in how he presents it. The pitch is simple. Use GitHub Copilot and the broader Microsoft ecosystem to build your personal brand online, even if you have no coding background whatsoever. Episode 1 covers setup, the GitHub Copilot student pack, and installing the app. Episode 2 gets into the actual building, prompting Copilot and generating a personal website from your resume. He was genuinely excited presenting it, and it's clearly meant as an accessible on-ramp for students and beginners. Building on that trailer, the first full episode of the series is hosted by Alexander Elgazabal and Gwendolyn von Kasemziri. Alexander is a software engineer at Microsoft and Merrimack College alum. Gwendolyn is a security program manager at Microsoft and Colorado State alum. Their chemistry is immediate and warm, and the whole thing feels like being walked through something by two friendly colleagues rather than watching a polished tutorial. They spend a chunk of the episode on the GitHub Student Developer Pack accessible at github.com/education/students, which is free for verified students and includes GitHub Pro with unlimited repositories and GitHub Actions, Copilot learning content, and thousands of dollars worth of resources. The application process asks for your university name, associated email, proof of enrollment, and typically takes about 3 days to approve. If your institution is recognized, it's straightforward. If not, you'll fill out some extra fields manually. They also walk through installing the GitHub Copilot desktop app from GitHub, com/features/AI/GitHub and V's Code from Code, Visual Studio, neither of which is complicated, standard installation wizards. Gwendolyn picked a purple theme and got a laugh out of it, turning more pink than she expected. The best moment was the Hello World demo. Gwendolyn typed, "Create a simple website that says Hello World and also has a big smiley face in the center." And Copilot immediately built a centered, rendered page with exactly that. They then asked Copilot to move it to her Documents folder, open it in a browser, and then open it in V's Code, all via natural language prompts, zero manual file management. Both hosts lit up a little at how quickly it all came together. The takeaway for beginners is exactly what they intended. You don't need to know how to code to start building things. Episode 2 of the series goes further, and this one is worth paying attention to closely, because the prompting philosophy Ashley states and Ahmed demonstrate is genuinely useful beyond just the portfolio context. Ashley is a software engineer at Microsoft and Indiana University alum. Ahmed is a product manager and University of Washington alum who describes his role as moral support, but actually contributes a lot of the design instincts. The goal is to build a full portfolio website from scratch using only a Resume PDF. Specifically, a fictional persona named Jamie Rivera, who uses they/them pronouns and is a communication and media studies student with a data analytics minor targeting internship recruiters. The prompting approach is the real lesson here. Ashley's starting prompt includes 2 key instructions that Ahmed emphasizes. First, please do not assume anything, and second, ask me clarifying questions to fill in gaps. Plus a third, confirm the final prompt with me before building anything. This creates a collaborative, iterative loop rather than a single-shot generation. Copilot then asks a structured series of questions, single page versus multi-page. They pick single, reasoning recruiters shouldn't have to navigate, clean and minimal versus bold and creative, clean and minimal. Primary call to action, contact me for internships, directly tied to Jamie's goal, links, placeholders, tech stack, HTML, CSS, JavaScript as Copilot recommended. Contact info, email only, and pronouns, yes, include they/them. Copilot then compiled all of this into a complete written prompt. Both hosts approved it, and it built the site. From there, they iterated through several conversational feature requests, a Resume PDF preview on Hover rather than an immediate download, University of Washington school colors, orange, green, black, because Ahmed wanted school spirit, a light-dark mode toggle, and finally sun and moon icons to replace text labels on that toggle, which Ahmed pushed for specifically. Ahmed got noticeably enthusiastic about the sun and moon icons, and they do look better. The final site has a real personality to it. The meta lesson is that treating the model as a collaborator, asking it for further improvement ideas at the end, is a valid workflow. They did exactly that and used Copilot's suggestions list as a springboard for what to tackle next. Episode 3 steps back from the Copilot interface entirely and does something a little different. Alexander Elgazabal stands at a whiteboard and gives a genuinely accessible explanation of Git and version control before Kurt Emrich demonstrates GitHub pages. If you've always found version control a little fuzzy, this is worth knowing about. Alexander's whiteboard explanation is excellent. He starts with the analogy everyone already understands, Microsoft Word's version history, and frames Git as exactly that, but for code files. The key concept he introduces is the diff. When you add a line to a file, that's an addition. When you remove lines, that's a deletion. Git tracks these diffs cumulatively rather than storing full copies of the file at every point, which is why it's so efficient. From there, he walks through branches and commits. A branch is a timeline of changes. Commits are the individual saved states along it. The default branch, main, holds stable code you'd be comfortable showing the world. Feature branches let you experiment without touching main. He works through the merge math concretely. If main has evolved to 2 lines while your feature branch has added 5 from a previous 9-line head, the merged result is 7 lines because Git is tracking diffs, not full copies. He's careful to say there are many merging strategies, but keeps it conceptual. The motivation for GitHub itself is delivered with a boat in the Caribbean scenario. You're on a boat, the driver turns too hard, your laptop goes overboard, all your local work is gone. That's why cloud storage exists, and GitHub is the cloud-based repository service. Pushing your code to GitHub means it survives hardware accidents. GitHub Pages then takes it one step further. It continuously hosts your website so anyone on the internet can reach it at any time. Kurt takes over for the live demo of creating a repo and publishing to Pages. Episode 4 is where the series gets into real configuration depth, with Shivani Sundarsan and Grant Harris walking through GitHub Copilot settings, session management, and 3 distinct operating modes. Shivani is a software engineer and University of Michigan alum. Grant is also a software engineer and University of Chicago alum, both calm and approachable, clearly targeting beginners. The settings tour covers the basics quickly: repository storage location, themes, account management. The interesting part is agent instructions. Shivani demonstrates typing, avoid technical jargon as much as possible, as a persistent instruction that automatically applies to every single prompt going forward. That's a small thing that makes a big difference in usability, especially for non-technical users. The session concept is important and she explains it cleanly. A repository is the project. A session is a specific conversation about that project. Start a new session whenever your task or goal changes. Inside each session, you control 2 things: which model is doing the reasoning, and the effort level, lower for quick questions, higher for complex problems. The 3 modes are where it gets really practical. Interactive mode is the default. No extra thinking, no actions without your approval, standard conversational copilot. Plan mode is demonstrated with a concrete prompt, adding a hobbies section to the portfolio website, asking Copilot to identify which files would change and wait for approval before doing anything. Grant highlights a technical detail worth knowing. Copilot creates a separate worktree for every session, so work in one session is isolated from other sessions, even within the same repo. The plan review step is explicitly where you should prompt again to modify before committing. Autopilot mode is what you engage once a plan is approved. It runs fully independently from that point, no further input needed. Grant stressed this clearly: have a concrete plan locked before going autopilot, because Copilot will proceed on its own. The demo result was Copilot generating a hobbies section with hiking, nature photography, and reading, both hosts approved. Episode 5 is probably the most technically useful episode in the series for anyone who's going to use Copilot seriously. Emily Rothrock and Shivani Sundarsan. Emily, a software engineer, and UVA alum. Shivani, you already know from the previous episode. Walk through exactly how the context window works and how to manage it intelligently. Shivani's suitcase analogy is genuinely helpful. The context window is the suitcase, tokens are the items you pack, and the suitcase has limited space, specifically 400,000 tokens in the GitHub Copilot app. 2 failure modes. Too little context means Copilot makes incorrect assumptions or asks annoying clarifying questions. Too much context means you've filled the window with noise that doesn't help. The explicit stated goal is not maximum context, it's minimum necessary context for the task. Emily demonstrates this with a before and after. First, she asks Copilot to create a case study page for a campus recycling project with 0 additional context. The output is generic and fabricated. The only accurate detail Copilot pulled in was spring 2025 from a resume file that happened to be in the folder. Everything else it invented. That's what low-context output looks like. She then adds real project files, a markdown doc about the project, PowerPoint presentations, a CSV of collected data, and a research paper. But here's the step that people miss. You can't just add files and assume Copilot notices. You have to run init, which generates a file called Copilot Instructions, MD, that tells Copilot what to read, what the project is about, and who the audience is. After running init and starting a fresh session, the same prompt produces a dramatically richer result: actual project data, real results, and even graphs. Emily's reaction, "Oh, we even got graphs," captures the difference nicely. The context monitoring is practical too. Running context shows your current usage. They went from 7% baseline to 13% after adding files. The compact command summarizes the current conversation into a single paragraph and drops usage back down. in their case from 13% to 8%. That's the tool to reach for when you want to keep a session going without starting over and without filling the window. Episode 9 of the series is a design-focused one. Gwendolyn and Garrett Berliner, a technical program manager and Oregon State alum, collaborate to modernize Jamie's portfolio website using Bootstrap 5. The energy here is very much a pair programming between friends vibe, with both hosts genuinely reacting to what appears on screen. They start by just looking at the current state of the site, plain HTML and CSS, everything at the top, no interactivity, and agreeing it feels flat. Before touching Copilot, they brainstorm their wish list: more modern look, hover interactions with card shadows or animations, better navigation, and Gwendolyn mentions a possible Flutter animation effect. The prompting approach here is instructive. First, they ask Copilot to suggest framework options for responsive, modern, hover interactive components. Copilot returns 3: Bootstrap, Tailwind CSS, and a web components library, and actually recommends Bootstrap itself. Both hosts agree immediately: Bootstrap for its quick responsive polish, built-in accessibility features, and low complexity, described as ideal for beginners. Garrett adds context on why it fits: pre-built responsive grid, navbars, cards, buttons, excellent cross-browser compatibility, all out of the box. The second prompt is specific: implement Bootstrap 5 with a sticky top navbar, sticky footer, and animated cards with shadow lift on hover. Copilot generates a plan, they approve all of it, and Copilot wires it in. The first pass is good, but the hover effect is too subtle. Gwendolyn prompts again, asking for more dramatic shadows, and this is a useful lesson about iteration. The second pass produces a noticeably stronger, clearer lift effect that both hosts are satisfied with. They also spontaneously decide to add a back-to-top link in the footer. Copilot adds it, and it works. Quick, clean, iterative. Episode 10 goes into extending Copilot beyond its built-in capabilities with external tool integrations, and Garrett and Emily are back together for this one. The central framing they return to throughout is Copilot is the brain, tools are the hands, which is a clean way to think about it. The first demo uses only built-in tools. The scenario involves a folder of hiking photos organized into 3 subfolders: Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic. The prompt asks Copilot to find the photos, grab several for the portfolio website, find a public internet photo of Mount Rainier, and display them. Emily explains that Copilot reads keywords in the prompt to figure out which tools to activate. Internet triggers web fetching, references to a local folder trigger file system browsing. No configuration required. The result was a trail journal photos section rendered as a slideshow on the portfolio site, which they were visibly pleased with. A follow-up prompt then asked Copilot to build a PowerPoint presentation from those images with captions and a nature-themed background. It wrote code to assemble the presentation under the hood. All of this without any MCP configuration. The second half introduces MCP Server's Model Context Protocol, which Emily initially calls multi-context protocols before correcting herself, and they both laugh it off. MCPs extend Copilot to external tools. In the Settings menu, there's a dedicated MCP Servers section with pre-configured options. They select Playwright, which gives the AI agent control over a web browser. One click to add the server green checkmark to confirm it's live. The prompt: use Playwright to take a screenshot of the latest news on the Microsoft developer website, capture at least 3 stories, summarize. First attempt fails because Playwright defaults to Chrome and Chrome wasn't installed. Emily handles this calmly. She prompts Copilot directly: ensure Playwright's default browser is Edge. Copilot restarts the MCP with Edge. There's a brief extra step needed: restart the session, but then it works. Playwright opens Edge, navigates to the site, captures screenshots. It couldn't fit 3 stories in one screenshot, but captured 2 shots that together showed all 3, a partial workaround Copilot devised itself. Emily and Garrett used the moment to make a point they clearly meant sincerely: AI is not infallible, and that's fine. Evaluate whether the workaround is good enough before prompting it to retry. In this case, the summary of developer news, dominated by AI agents, recorded at end of July, was perfectly usable. Episode 7 is one of the more practically powerful episodes in the series. Caleb Cole and Kurt Emrich walk through building reusable Copilot skills, and the use case they choose is compelling enough to make the concept click immediately. Caleb is a software engineer and WVU Institute of Technology alum. Kurt is also a software engineer and Vanderbilt alum. They're relaxed and collegial, and the episode has a genuine pair programming energy with honest acknowledgments when things don't work the first time. The throughline is Jamie's portfolio blog, which is currently empty. The goal is to give Jamie a repeatable workflow for creating blog posts from raw notes. They first execute the workflow manually so you understand what they're about to automate. The manual workflow has 5 steps. First, Jamie did a podcast and has raw notes. They paste those notes plus a prompt asking Copilot to write a clear, conversational blog post in Jamie's voice. Second, rather than accepting the first draft, they invoke the rubber duck agent for a second opinion. Kurt explains this concept with real enthusiasm. The rubber duck agent is set to low trust mode, meaning it doesn't assume you're right. It reads your reasoning back to you to poke holes in it. The name comes from the classic debugging technique of explaining your code to a rubber duck that knows nothing, forcing you to notice your own errors. It failed the first time due to model capacity issues. They acknowledged it, moved on, and it worked on the second try. Third, they accept the suggestions and convert the draft to HTML. Fourth, Copilot opens a local web server and previews the page. Fifth, they push to GitHub. After completing this manually, Caleb prompts Copilot. Create a skill called Create Blog based on what we just did, resolve any ambiguities. Because the conversation context is still fresh, Copilot generates the skill without needing clarification, a skill, MD Markdown file with the 5-step workflow inside. He runs clear to flush all session context, then types a single prompt in a completely clean session. Use the Create Blog skill to create a post from Jamie's recycling dashboard notes. The agent finds the skill, follows the steps, runs the rubber duck critique, converts to HTML, previews, and pushes. Clean repeatability with 0 context required. They also demonstrate a plugin marketplace, a GitHub repository containing a marketplace config file added via URL in Copilot settings under plugins. A pre-built skill, Resume Site Sync, is there, which updates a portfolio website whenever a resume changes. They show it working. Paste a junior year and a senior year resume, invoke the skill, and the portfolio updates in real time to reflect the new internship, expanded skills, and additional podcast entries. Both hosts noted how genuinely useful this is for students who constantly update resumes but neglect their portfolio sites. Episode 8 is a standalone but related. Alexander Elgazabal walks through what to do when you hit GitHub Copilot's token or credit limits, which is the Bring Your Own Model feature. His tone here is notably candid, admitting multiple times that he doesn't fully know his way around the Azure portal UI, and rather than pretend otherwise, he uses Copilot and an MCP to handle it for him, which is actually a neat meta-demonstration of the tools. The process: in GitHub Copilot settings under Model Providers, you can add external models. Local options include OLLAMA and Foundry Local, good if you have hardware and want prompts to stay on your machine. Cloud options include Microsoft Foundry and Azure OpenAI. He focuses on Microsoft Foundry. Before getting into the demo, he mentions that students get a one-time $100 credit when they sign up for Azure with a student email. He'd spent 2 cents of his at time of recording. Rather than navigate the Azure portal manually, he installs the Azure MCP server in Copilot settings and uses voice dictation to prompt Copilot to create a Foundry resource for him. He catches an interesting moment. Copilot reported the deployment had partially failed with an identity issue, but when he checked the Azure portal, both a Foundry resource and a Foundry project had actually been created successfully. He flags this as a possible hallucination and makes it a teaching moment. Always verify what your model did in the actual external system. Don't trust its self-reported success or failure. He then uses Copilot again to deploy a model, GPT-4o Mini, inside the Foundry project and verifies it in the portal. Back in Copilot, he adds the provider, display name, base URL in the format project name, services, AI Azure, com/OpenAI/v1, wire type set to responses, and his API key. The first hello world fails with a rate limit error. The Foundry deployment was capped at 1,000 tokens per minute, which isn't enough given the Copilot app's overhead with all its tools loaded. He goes back to the portal, raises the limit to 250,000 tokens per minute, and the second attempt works. A follow-up prompt confirms the external model still has access to the full GitHub Copilot tooling harness, meaning you don't lose Copilot's functionality by bringing your own model. The final episode in the Microsoft series is a fun one. Grant Harris and Caleb Cole demonstrate GitHub Copilot's remote control feature, which lets you hand off an active desktop session to your phone midstream. Grant is a University of Chicago alum. Caleb you know from episode 7. The premise is simple and genuinely useful. You start a Copilot session on your laptop, type remote on, and Copilot generates a QR code. You scan it with the GitHub mobile app and you're instantly in the same session, mirrored exactly as it appeared on the desktop. The laptop keeps running, the phone becomes the control surface. The demo involves adding a scroll progress bar to Jamie's portfolio site. Grant submits the prompt on the desktop, asking Copilot to implement it and to ask clarifying questions one at a time. Then, rather than sitting at the laptop, Caleb activates remote control, scans the QR code, and the two physically walk outside into what is described as a sunny Redmond day. They receive the first clarifying question on their phones. Should the navbar stay fixed or scroll away? They want it fixed. Second question, thin bar at the top of the page or integrated into the navigation bar? They choose integrated. After 2 rounds of Q&A, they send a final instruction to use its own judgment on remaining decisions and open the result in Canvas. They go back inside, check the desktop, and the scroll progress bar is there, working exactly as they specified remotely. It's a small feature, but the demo makes the point well. You can meaningfully interact with a running Copilot session from anywhere with a phone. Shifting gears completely to energy tech, Sam Evans from the Electric Viking was in full astonishment mode for this one, and honestly the numbers justify it. Flinders University in South Australia has developed an aqueous zinc iodine battery that achieves over 60,000 charge cycles with near-zero degradation and a full recharge in 3 minutes. Sam's line, "That's not a battery, that's an heirloom," captures the scale of the claim pretty well. Cycled daily, it would last over 160 years. For comparison, he notes that the best sodium-ion batteries, which he's been enthusiastic about previously, top out around 20,000 cycles. This is more than 3 times better. The chemistry is zinc iodine, which is not new. It's been known for years and has attractive properties: cheap materials, safe water-based operation, and iodine with a theoretical capacity of around 211 mAh per gram. The problem has always been the shuttle effect. Polyiodide compounds leak through the separator, depleting active material and killing the battery prematurely. That's what has blocked commercialization. The Flinders innovation is using cyclodextrin, a cheap biodegradable polymer derived from starch that's already used in food and cosmetics. Sam was particularly excited that it's not some exotic material. Exotic materials kill commercial viability. Cyclodextrin molecules act as microscopic cages, water-loving on the outside, water-repelling interior cavity. That interior cavity physically traps polyiodides and releases them on demand, effectively neutralizing the shuttle effect. His summary: the shuttle effect essentially solved with plant sugar. The performance numbers at different operating points. At 200 mAh per gram, the cells last 8,000 cycles on a 7-minute charge. Reduce to 150 mAh per gram and charge in 3 minutes, and cycle life exceeds 60,000, with degradation of only 0.0001% to 0.0003% per cycle, described as effectively imperceptible. Voltage is 1.3 to 1.4 volts. Sam got notably patriotic when discussing commercialization. Australia holds between 20 and 28% of the world's known zinc reserves, and the Flinders team is already working with industry partners on a commercial prototyping platform. He contrasted this with lithium, where processing is concentrated in China, and argued Australia has everything it needs for a sovereign energy storage manufacturing industry. He expressed real anticipatory disappointment at the idea of this being developed outside Australia. He also covered April's Australian home battery installation records: 2.4 gigawatt-hours of residential capacity installed in a single month, a 57% increase over March, and a record in Australian history. The trigger was a rush to install before changes to the federal cheaper home batteries rebate took effect on May 1st. Wiz described the growth curve as approaching exponential. Context: roughly 4.2 million Australian households have rooftop solar, but only about 360,000 have paired batteries, meaning only around 10% of the addressable market has been tapped. Also from the Electric Viking, and thematically relevant to what he often talks about regarding EV demand dynamics, Honda's first electric car in Australia, called the Super One, sold out its entire 2026 allocation of 125 units within hours of pre-orders opening. Sam was a bit gleeful about this, framing it as validation of a point he says he's made repeatedly. EV buyers don't just want cheap options. The car itself is small and light, 3.6 meters long, 1,090 kilograms. It has a 47 kilowatt front motor that boosts to 70 kilowatts when you press the boost button. The battery is 29.6 kilowatt-hours. WLTP range is 206 kilometers or 320 in city conditions, and a 10 to 80% charge takes about 30 minutes. It also has synthesized fake engine sounds and simulated gear shifts, and a retro-styled interior. In Australia, it's priced at $36,900 drive-away, which is roughly $24,000 US. Here's the detail Sam found most telling. That's approximately $10,000 more than a base model BYD ATT01, which itself is not a slow seller. BYD moved 282 units of the ATT01 in Australia in July alone. Despite that significant price premium, Honda buyers didn't hesitate. Honda is now taking orders for 2027 delivery, with two-tone color variants waiting until mid-2027. The same demand surge is happening globally. Over 7,000 reservations in Japan in the first month at around $21,000 US, and a strong UK launch at $25,500 US, where it undercuts the Renault Twingo and Kia EV1. Sam's conclusion is the thesis he's been building toward. Consumers want EVs that are small, light, fun, and aesthetically appealing, not just the cheapest option available. The Super One, he argues, proves the market for that kind of product is real and ready. He briefly flagged the irony that this demand surge comes right after Honda canceled its EV plans in North America at a cost of nearly $20 billion. His "I told you so" energy there was palpable. The last video of the day comes with a disclosure up front. This is a promotional interview between Sam Evans and John Passalacqua, CEO of First Phosphate, and it was granted exclusively before a press release crossed and before the stock was unhalted. Sam says as much himself, so viewer discretion on the investment angle, but the underlying arguments about battery supply chains are worth knowing. Passalacqua's core framework starts with what he calls the future of the electron. His argument is that electricity is the fundamental medium of the modern economy, powering AI, phones, homes, grids, and the ability to store it is still dramatically underappreciated as a growth category. Then comes his signature line, which Sam clearly loved: the electron has ADHD. The explanation is that electrons naturally want to move, ground out, and dissipate. They can't sit still. A battery's entire job is to force electrons to stay put until you need them. Without that capability, grids remain unstable and unreliable. He sees energy storage as the underpinning of everything else in the energy transition. On phosphate specifically, he pushes back against the assumption that because phosphate is abundant in fertilizer, it's not a bottleneck for batteries. The critical distinction is purity. Battery-grade phosphate must be high purity, and most phosphate globally doesn't qualify. He uses the ancient mariner analogy, water everywhere, nothing to drink, to illustrate that raw abundance doesn't mean usable supply. Sam loved this. His market sizing argument is the most pointed one. In a lithium iron phosphate battery, phosphate makes up over 60% of the battery by composition. Lithium makes up only about 4%, yet capital markets have heavily focused on lithium. He counts roughly 150 lithium-focused projects on global exchanges. First Phosphate, he claims, is essentially the only company 100% dedicated to phosphate specifically for electrification, meaning they've built and currently occupy a category of their own. On policy, his answer to what single change would most accelerate domestic battery supply chains is procurement mandates. Governments have massive purchasing power and should attach certificates of origin requirements to battery procurement. Even starting at 5% or 10% local content would force industry to build domestic supply chains and create offtake agreements. He's explicit that industry won't do it voluntarily because corporate time horizons max out at about 1 year and profit optimization always favors the cheapest global source. He says he's been making this argument at defense conferences and getting strong responses. The breaking news that prompted the interview. The G7's Critical Minerals Resilience and Production Alliance has shown formal interest in the first phosphate project, with active support from Italy, Denmark, and Canada at the senior minister, senior State Department, and sovereign fund level. Pasalacqua frames this as a major de-risking event, governmental endorsement, that puts first phosphate at the front of the queue for onshoring LFP supply chains in the West. Sam called it awesome and fantastic several times. Again, this was an exclusive before the press releases crossed, so if this topic is of interest to you, the public announcements would have followed. That's all 16 videos wrapped up. Quite a range today, from a potential turning point for Linux on the desktop, through a full beginner to intermediate GitHub Copilot curriculum, and into some genuinely exciting battery and EV news out of Australia. Plenty to follow up on.